So welcome everyone to the webinar Evidence-Informed Building Blocks for Learning Design from Fake to Cherry on the Cake. My name is Virginie Sassario and I'll be sharing this session today, and our speaker is Miriam Nealon. And before I introduce our speaker, I would like to do some housekeeping. So first, the hashtag for this event is hashtag LTSF20 if you want to communicate on the social media. Our thanks go today to our today's sponsor, Thrive, without which it wouldn't be possible to do this webinar. The slides will be available to download at the end of this presentation, and this webinar is being recorded. So the recording, slides, and chat and other supporting documents will be available also from next week at the Learning Technologies website. All right, thank you, John. I'm trying to do my best with my mic. We just discovered that I had a technical issue and it went all well during the rehearsal. Anyway, this is live, we need to adapt them. So we have a very full session today, already 240 people online, no pressure at all. So sadly, we won't be able to answer all of the questions. You can follow up after the session with Miriam on LinkedIn or on social media if you want it. Also, the chat may be cleared from time to time during this session, and do not worry, it will be saved and you can still access it from the recording next week. So now let me introduce you our speaker today. So Miriam has around 15 years of experience in the learning field and is known for her work on evidence-informed learning design. She has had a collaborative blog with Emeritus Professor Paul A. Kirschen for over 4 years, and they also recently published a book on evidence-informed learning design together. And we have a surprise for you. So bear with us until the end of this webinar. And now I'd like to hand the floor over to Miriam. So over to you, Miriam.
Thanks, Virginie, for the introduction. Welcome, everybody. Great numbers and a great global audience. So I'm really happy that everybody's here. I hope we'll have a great discussion about evidence-informed building blocks for learning design, moving from fake to the cherry on the cake. Virginie has done a great job introducing me already, so I'll just add that in my current job, I drive like front-end design processes, being responsible for the design integrity, working with various learning teams to push whatever learning experience we need over the line, and I see that holistically, so it can basically be anything we need. So let's just kick off. I would like to start with a question for you. How are you already using scientific evidence from the learning sciences in your work? So feel free to first select an answer from the multiple choice there on the left-hand side, and if you want to explain why you picked that answer, you can type it in to the poll. Okay, so quite some people say I don't really know what scientific evidence from a learning sciences means, so that's great that you're here because you are about to find out at least parts of it. Okay, some people saying that they don't really apply it yet. Some people say they do. Some people say they read. Some people say they publish. So quite a wide variety of answers. You need to pick more than one option. Yeah, that's a good point. And Mike is saying that's why I'm here, so that's great. And I think and hope that's true for many people. Olivier is saying I've read your book, so I'm trying. So great. So yeah, so a lot of positive answers here, and I'm really happy to see that that people are here. So that to me tells that you guys acknowledge that it might be important to know a bit more about. And today we'll discuss what strong evidence looks like and how that evidence can inform our practice. So what I hope that by the end of this webinar, you will take another step to become a better evidence-informed practitioner using scientific evidence to inform our design decisions. And it is critical because without it, we get stuck in what I call the Photoshop effect. So the Photoshop effect is a term that was first used by Farhad Manjoo. And, you know, it's because we have Photoshop, so we can edit all kinds of photos, and it's really hard to know which photos are fake and which are real. And this phenomenon has also spread to all information. Any self-declared expert can post whatever they want on the internet, and it's just hard to trust expertise, you know, even true expertise. So we are very prone to this phenomenon as well when it comes to the learning profession. We make decisions based on beliefs, intuitions, gut feeling, and then we ignore or dismiss the evidence that we actually have from the sciences, or maybe we're not even aware that it's there. So we are in a state of fake. And today is a plea from me to start building a strong foundation for our practice. If we want our profession to mature, if we want to build like a truly respected profession, we need to open our eyes to the evidence so that we can better distinguish between fake and real. And a quick note, when I say evidence-informed learning design, I'm talking about this trinity. All three elements are equally important. It's just that today we are going to zoom in on the scientific evidence only from the learning sciences, because, you know, that's just the most objective evidence that we can work with. And if we do it right, it's the strongest evidence as well. So we're going to discuss 3 building blocks today to start building our foundation and to beat the Photoshop effect. No surprise, we start with number 1, which is about training research. This article is from Salas and colleagues from 2012, and it's a meta-analysis focusing in on training and development in organizations and what matters in practice, which is really cool, right, for us as practitioners. So this article clearly discusses the evidence around what training design requires in order for training to be effective. First, for training to be effective, the goal needs to be a sustainable change in behavior and cognition. So keep that in mind, right? When we talk about training, and if we want training to be effective, the goal should be this. Secondly, that training needs to include planned and systematic activities to learn targeted knowledge, skills, and attitudes, all integrated through instruction, demonstration, practice, and feedback. So the article clearly outlines, 1, what training is and isn't, and also the scientific evidence around what requirements training needs to meet in order for it to be effective. However, when we think about a Photoshop effect, we are sadly currently in a state of fake. For example, we default to training when dealing with a performance problem. And I think this has many reasons. Sometimes it's, you know, the way we're organized. Something lands on our plate and somebody else has already decided that we need training. And in my experience, it's usually unclear how the analysis was done, how they landed on that conclusion. And also, when doing more research, sometimes it turns out that training won't be the right solution. So, for example, I was once asked to integrate collaboration in the training that we were actually redesigning it. And I was a bit skeptical. So I started to do some learner research, and I found out that they didn't collaborate, not because they didn't know how to, but because they were not incentivized for it. They, you know, the client only paid them one amount of money, and if they were doing what they were told, breaking the silos, you know, collaborating with other departments, they had to share that amount, and therefore it impacted negatively on their targets. So there was really no good reason for them to do it. So whatever training you are going to throw it at, it's not going to solve the problem, right? So another example of the current state of fake is that we design poor training for the wrong reasons. Or in other words, we basically call everything we do training. We might have a 1 or 2 day workshop, where senior people are sharing all kinds of stories about projects and where people have good discussions around their work and how to get better. Um, there might be like a networking dinner in the evening, which is all great. I'm not saying that it's not valuable. It's just not training, right? When we think about the research, it's really clear that it needs to be something that is about a sustainable change in behavior of cognition. It needs to happen over time, systematic, planned out activities, etc., etc. We also have like information-based stuff, knowledge-based stuff. Oh, we want people to just understand X and we create something. Well, great, again, can be very useful. It's not training. Or we have like very generic stuff around storytelling or mindfulness, without having a clear goal in mind. So again, not saying it's useless, it's just not training. Um, Last example of our state of fake is that we bash training in general. There's also, a stream that says things like, oh, we don't need training, we learn all the time, we just need to learn the workflow, work is learning is work. Again, not saying there's no truth in these, sayings. We definitely need to be critical about these things. But think about the evidence. We need training for sure in certain circumstances. So it's about distinguishing between what's the problem we're trying to solve. Do we need that change in behavior, change in cognition? Do we need to design something over time with planned activities, et cetera, et cetera? So how does the evidence that we have from training research help us change our practice and, you know, overcome this state of fake, basically? So just to recap, um, we need training. The evidence tells us that we need training if we are striving for that change in behavior and cognition on the job, right? We need to focus on the process of how to get there. It's a journey, not an event. We need to differentiate. This is really important as well, between what people need to know and do and what they need to access, right? So that's the differentiation between learning solutions and performance support. So this is building block 1 done. We're on our way up. Yay. So let's move on to the second building block, which is about complex learning. And complex learning is when declarative learning, so knowledge-based, procedural learning, skills-based, and effective learning, attitudes, are integrated in a task. We are going to talk about a case study. We are working with a company called Build More, and they have too many accidents involving ladders. We have a ladder safety problem on our hands. They've done a proper performance analysis. They have determined that training is indeed the best way to solve this performance problem. So it's time to train their people on ladder safety, right? So here is a list of objectives that they came up with. Thanks to Patty Shank. So 4 objectives, and then their design looks like this. So don't get too hung up on the activities. I just came up with some examples. It can be other things as well. But this is what matters when we think about the design. All the activities are mapped to each objective separately. Now here's a question for you. What is your reaction when you see this design? So you can type it in. You can type in the left-hand box, this design is effective because, and on the right-hand side, this design is ineffective because. I would love to hear your answers. So this is interesting, right? Because people are typing in both boxes. So people are looking at this from different perspectives. So some people say that the objectives are clear and structured, that they're measurable. Yes, that's very true. Clear, I see. Nice blended approach. Yes, different types of activities, right? On the right hand side, somebody says not holistic. What's the impact of not following instructions? No rationale given. Visually boring. Right. Okay. So, it's clear that we can look at this, right, from all kinds of different perspectives. However, in the end, what we want to achieve is that we want people to be able to apply what they've learned on the job, right? And from that perspective, it's not effective. And the reason is that because training each objective separately is ineffective for performance, because in real life, all these activities are integrated in one job task. So let's say that the job task is washing windows on a two-story building on a windy day. If you have to complete that task, you need to be able to do all these things integrated. So when you train people per learning objective or each learning objective separately, you're not training them to actually do what they need to do on the job, and they won't be able to transfer what they've learned to the job. So how do we know this? How do we know that this type of design is ineffective for complex learning? It's from this book. So this book is really, really good and has a ton of useful stuff. It's not a book that you read front to end, but it's like stuffed with great evidence and great examples, and it explains how to design effectively for complex learning. So the first piece of evidence shows what I just explained as well, that atomistic design, which is breaking a complex domain or task into a set of distinct objectives, doesn't work because learners are then not capable to integrate the separate elements in transfer situations. So instead, you need to use real-life authentic tasks to help learners integrate the knowledge, skills, and attitudes that are also part of the actual job tasks. And that facilitates transfer. You might say, duh, real-life tasks, but if you look at how we design in organizations, it's still like the way the example I just showed is still quite classic. That we have a list of objectives and different activities for each objectives. So in addition to using real-life authentic tasks, what we then also need to do is provide people with problem-solving guidance and scaffolding. So what does that mean? So problem-solving guidance is a systematic approach to problem solving. So it could be modeling examples. So in the case of the ladder safety example, you could, for example, take that job task of washing windows on a two-story building on a windy day and explain step by step how to make your decision around which ladder to use, how to scan for hazards. So you explain all the decision making along the way, step by step, but also why that's the case. So that's problem solving guidance. Scaffolding support and guidance is twofold. One is supportive information. So that's information that helps people to perform non-routine aspects of the task. So for example, let's say, I'm not a ladder safety expert, but let's say that it's not straightforward, if then how to select a ladder, then you can give people, for example, guiding questions to help them make the right considerations so that they have a bit of support to think through and then being able to make the right decision that way. The second type of scaffolding is just-in-time support. We often call that performance support in the workplace, which is information that you give at the moment of need, which is about performing routine aspects of the task. So that could be something like a checklist in the case that something is the same over and over again. So you can give them, you know, a checklist, for example, as I said. And then when people progress, you slowly fade out that guidance and support, and they become more independent. So again, when it comes to complex learning, we are also in a state of fake. And let me show you, because I'm pretty sure you recognize it. We do this all the time. We tackle complex problems by reducing all the tasks involved to simpler or smaller components, like, you know, in the latter example. So that's the atomistic design. And it happens because we don't know what the research tells us. It's just a gap between research and practice. So another example is what we also saw in the latter scenario, where we call this fragmentation. That's where you map the activities to each objective separately. And then last but not least, we distinguish between knowledge, skills, and attitudes. We see this a lot where we either say in organizations, oh, we just need people to understand this, and then we give them something knowledge-based. Or, oh yeah, and then when they become more advanced, that's when we start to consider skills and consider practice. And that doesn't make any sense, because knowledge and skills always go hand in hand. And if you teach them separately, or assume that knowledge becomes before skill, it's just simply not true. So if you want people to be aware or understand something, you can either give them resources, or you can ask yourself, like, what are we going to achieve with this? So when we think about the evidence that we have, how does that help us to beat the Photoshop effect? How can we change our practice? Somebody is typing away. I don't know if everybody can go on mute. Thank you. So yeah, we need to use authentic task again, you know, that people actually need to do on the job. And then it's about starting with realistic tasks that are relatively easy. So for example, in the ladder safety scenario, there are probably situations where there are less hazards, for example, or where it's easier to decide which ladder you need to use. So you need to make an analysis up front, like these are the more easy tasks, and then slowly move towards more difficult ones. And then the other really important piece is that you need to let people practice within the same, what we call task class. So for example, easy could be one task class. Within that class, you need to make sure you offer variable practice. So that means that they, you know, people practice within different contexts, but at the same level of complexity. And then the third part is around the scaffolding, where you start with high levels of scaffolding at the start, and then slowly fade it out when people progress. So we are making progress building our foundation. This was the second building block, and it's firmly placed, so we can move on to the last one, which is about self-regulated learning. So self-regulated learning is happens at a micro level. So that's around how people regulate learning at a learning task level. So it's about task orientation, planning, monitoring, self-assessing, and there's lots of great research when it comes to self-regulated learning. And one piece of evidence is crystal clear, and that is that we're dealing with a paradox. And that is that people who are good at driving their own learning are already high performers, with a lot of domain knowledge. The key point is, if you don't have a lot of knowledge, you cannot effectively regulate your own learning. You simply don't know what you don't know. Self-regulated learning is not a general skill that can be separated from domain knowledge. And don't be fooled, you are a novice whenever you're dealing with a subject that you don't have a lot of knowledge of. If I want to become an engineer tomorrow, I am a novice learning, and I won't be good at regulating my own learning in that space. because I really don't know anything about the domain. So there are a couple of reasons for this paradox. The first one is that we often go wrong when it comes to learning. People with less expertise, they struggle because they are bad at judging their own knowledge. They're overconfident. We don't know whether our knowledge is sufficient to make good decisions. So the Dunning-Kruger effect is worst case scenario where you're so incompetent that you're unaware how incompetent you are. But even if you know a little bit about something, we're still bad at judging our own knowledge and competence. Also, we have faulty models and faulty mental models when it comes to learning. That gets in the way of regulating our own learning. So, for example, when we believe that ineffective learning strategies such as, I don't know, highlighting are effective, or the other way around, that effective learning strategies like self-explanations, that they are ineffective. And sometimes even when we make a conscious plan to approach our learning in a certain way, we still don't necessarily regulate our learning mindfully. And that is just simply because we fall back on our bad habits. And then the last reason why we're dealing with the paradox is that we struggle with judging our learning outcomes. A good example is when we read something twice. So when we reread it, we feel more confident and we think, yes, now I understand it. I got this. I will remember it now. While in fact, what's happened is that we just recognize what we've seen earlier. And so we judge that incorrectly as that we will now remember or that we now better understand, which is not the same thing. So after all this, a bit of a, I don't know, sad um, conclusion about being human, there's also some good news, and that is that we can give people guidance to help them regulate their own learning better. So, for example, we can make them more aware about which learning strategies are effective and which ones are not so effective. We can integrate self-regulated learning support in our training designs. Van Marienboer and Kirchner call this second-order scaffolding. So it's basically transitioning from, more instructor or system control to more learner control. What's also really important in self-regulated learning is that you learn how to determine when to involve other people to support you. That's really critical as well. So again, I'm really sorry, but when it comes to self-regulated learning, our profession is also clearly in the state of fake. So let me show you. I think this is a big one. We incorrectly assume that we acquire learning skills on our own. We incorrectly assume that because we're adults, we know how to learn best. And the research just clearly shows that that's really not the case. We are very overconfident, when it comes to judging our own knowledge, our own results. We just have bad habits and beliefs about how we learn best. So it's just not as easy as we might think. Second, we actually, this is what we usually call self-directed learning in the organization. And that is where we, for example, build a learning environment with all kinds of, interesting content that might or might not be closely related. And then we say, oh, people can go in and they can pick and choose whatever is relevant to them, and then they can create their own learning paths, etc., etc. So people can do, they can direct their own learning, and we have this self-directed learning environment. It doesn't have anything to do with self-directed learning. Self-directed learning, self-regulated learning, it's about setting your own personal intentional goals, planning your learning, selecting the activities that you need to achieve your goal, monitoring progress, etc. So it's not about here is a bunch of stuff and you go figure it out. And the last one is at a slightly different level, but I'm sure it is just no surprise. We just don't ensure a symbiotic relationship between the organization and the individual learner. and they really depend on each other when it comes to self-regulated learning. So, for example, the organization's mission, values, culture, the work environment, they all influence the extent to which self-regulated learning can take place within the organization. People need the right environments to be able to regulate their own learning effectively. And in turn, the individual self-regulated learning must account for and must fulfill the learning needs of both the organization and the individual, right? Um, so we need to do a better job in making sure that the organizational goals are aligned with personal goals, that the environment is there, etc., etc. So again, when we think about the evidence around self-regulated learning, how can it help us change our practice? How can we change our practice based on the evidence? So we can integrate support in formal learning experience, and that is a good way to start because it is, something that we have a bit of control over. So it could be a good starting point. So this could be about helping learners overcome their faulty mental models, teach them effective learning strategies, etc. We also need to build an environment that really supports people to set their own goals, select their own tasks and activities and materials, and figure out where they can find the right support, how to monitor their progress. And ideally, this is all aligned with performance achievement stuff as well. So workers' performance goals should be clearly aligned, right, to organizational goals, or at least we need to distinguish between, okay, this is what you're doing in line with the organizational goals. This is really what you're doing for yourself, and it's an individual for your own growth, because that's important as well. So we can do many different things with this evidence in practice. So that was the third building block of our foundation for today. So let's take a look at an overview of how the evidence can help us, break out of the Photoshop effect and help to make progress towards a more mature and evidence-informed profession. So I'm not going to talk through this again, but the reason I think it's nice to have this overview is because I think it makes really clear that the research that we have is not just academic. There are plenty clear practical guidelines that flow from the research that we can all use, and there are many more building blocks like this. At the start of this webinar, I said that I hoped that you will take another step to become an evidence-informed practitioner, because using scientific evidence to inform our practice is critical to move away from fake to the cherry on the cake. And my ask of you,
Miriam,
yes,
maybe just to spend a little time on this slide, could you re-explain, please, the concept of scaffolding?
Oh, yeah, that's a really big topic. So there are different types of the scaffolding, or the three different examples.
Well, the scaffolding concept, yes, if you could re-explain that.
Yeah, so for example, when we think about the ladder safety problem, the highest level of scaffolding is where you give people a worked out example. So you literally show them, this is a job that somebody had to do, for which they need a ladder. This is how they made the decisions along the way, and this is why those are good decisions to make. So that's the highest level of scaffolding, where people are not doing anything yet themselves. It's just an example to learn from, and that has really detailed explanations around the decision-making progress. Then when people start to practice, first, there are many different types, but for example, what you could do, you could give them another worked out example, but then partially worked out, and then you can let them make decisions around certain parts of the task. So you can just leave a gap and then say, okay, what do you think you need to do here? And then the trick there, the trick about scaffolding is that you always, no matter what, let people make decisions being aware of the whole. So you never break it into distinct parts. You just integrate it in the whole, and then you give them more or less support. I hope that's helpful. There's just so many different types of scaffolding that I could talk about. Is there like a specific question?
No, actually, I think it did answer the question. It was about having some examples, from moving from highly scaffold to independent practice.
Right. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So my ask of you is to start using the scientific evidence that we have so that we can start building a foundation for our profession together, beating the Photoshop effect, moving away from the fake to the cherry on the cake. So maybe, I don't know, I haven't followed the chat, obviously, but maybe we could talk also a little bit about what could your next step be to become a better evidence-informed practitioner.
And you can let us know in chat, yes, what will your next step be? All right, thank you very much, Miriam. I think it's a topic very close to our heart, because we all want, as L&D professionals, do a great work, and we want to add value to the people attending our training. So we want to make sure that the training is worth it, and is really needed. Laura said, this is such an important topic. Too many L&D folk have no idea of what practice is effective and why. And Carrie said, pedagogy is to lead the child, andragogy is to lead the man, and autagogy is to lead oneself. And Laura said that she liked the gray text, in your box, so the designs, so you had some pressure being the one after done, and you did a great job, I think, about engaging.
Yeah, no, I did feel a little bit of pressure.
Antonio said yes, he agree as well. The first question when he's asked for a training is why. Why do you need a question?
Yes, that is pretty good.
So I did tell you, and we were going to answer some of the questions, but I did tell you we had a surprise for you, and the surprise is this one. So you can get, Miriam's book with a 20% discount, and we are going to provide you with the link to that. So yes, you can benefit from it, and you can also download the slide, and there are many resources also that you can take from this training, from this webinar, sorry. My spirit is just wrong. All right, so we have some questions here for you. So when you were talking about breaking down the tasks, so Laura is asking, based on what you said about breaking down tasks being ineffective, does this mean that, sorry, I can't read them. All right. So yes, does this mean deliberate practice has no value? So I am somewhat confused. The presenter seems to be arguing against breaking down complex to simple component tasks, but then talks about training simple to complex.
So I think the question is, does it mean that deliberate practice has no value? And the answer is no, that's not what I'm saying at all. Deliberate practice is more around parts. 10 Steps to Complex Learning discusses that as well, that you have certain, you can work with certain part tasks, especially when it's things that need to be automated or that you need to practice a lot. It really depends on what the task is, of course, but in certain contexts, I mean, deliberate practice is not always well understood as well, but it is really about like a part of the task and do it again and again and again and again. So that's more when you really need to automate pieces. So no, it's definitely not saying that that's not useful. It's just a very specific type of practice.
All right, thank you. So moving to self-regulated learning. And sorry, I struggle at reading. All right, so So yes, moving to self-regulated learning. So Astrid asked, how can we move from directed to self-regulated learning in a young learning culture? And it means the culture of learning in itself, not necessarily the people nor the company, but the understanding of what learning is, or responsibilities, expectations are not very mature.
Yeah, that is a good question. It's not an easy one to answer, and it is why I kind of suggested to start integrating it in the formal learning experiences, and that might feel a bit counterintuitive, because the formal learning is only like such a small part of what people are doing, but it's just that you can structure it easier that way and integrate the self-regulated learning support. So it's more about asking really good reflection questions and making really clear how the goals align to the organizational goals, how what you're doing is part of it, helping people to track progress along the way. I've seen a performance achievement system as well in one of the organizations that I worked in, where it wouldn't be difficult to integrate, where you set your performance goals and, you could ask people for feedback throughout the year, like continuously. So it was quite good, but it wasn't necessarily aligned to learning yet. So it could be like one step from this is my performance and I'm asking feedback on my performance around, okay, what am I going to do learning wise to support my performance objective, and then also ask feedback about the learning, the process itself, instead of just the performance.
Thank you. And Jose is asking, do you have a definition of training as understood by you to put us in context?
Yeah, so to me, I would go back to what Salas and colleagues are saying. Training is when you're trying to achieve a sustainable change in behavior and cognition, for which you need systematic and planned activities throughout a process, and for which people need, this kind of depends on where they are, but let's say they're novice learners, they need some type of explanation, instruction, demonstration, they need a lot of examples, they need to be able to practice themselves, and they need to be able to get feedback on their practice. So to me, that's when you use training, and that's how you use training.
Thank you. And the last one, and because with the COVID crisis, we have been in a virtual training a lot now. And Rachel is asking, to what extent can effective learning design be delivered remotely? Do you have any advice around this or examples of when this has been done successfully?
So when you think about, the definition that I just gave, I think almost automatically, let's say that you have to do it 100% online, it needs to be somehow blended, as in you need asynchronous and synchronous elements of it. And the reason is that people need to be able to practice, but they might, they could do that independently and asynchronously, but there might also be pieces where they need direct feedback and immediate feedback. So, you can use systems for that, but also observers, or you can have like, people need to be able to ask questions. So my short answer is it can definitely be done. There's so many different options with like simulations, scenario-based learning. You can get quite far with online training.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much for your all great ideas and insight around that.
Yeah, I'm very sorry that I wasn't able to follow the chat, so I will take a look and come back, to the
Yes,
people
there are many other questions, and I'm sure, yes, it could provide some food for thought for you as well, to write in your blogs. And you can find the link to the blogs, Miriam's blogs, in the useful resources. So this is already the end of our webinar today. Thank you very much for attending. Thanks again to our sponsor, Thrive, for allowing us to do this webinar. And if you want to attend the next one, then you can find the link now in chat. Thank you everyone for sharing your experience and comments, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody. Sorry, I'm just typing in the chat. I'll do my best to answer all the questions.